Members, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Hearing none. I think before I move on, I would ask for a moment of silence. The board observe a moment of silence in memory of Police Constable Thierry Leroux of the Lac Simon Aboriginal Police Force, who was killed while on duty on February the 13th, 2016. I'd ask you to rise for a minute. Thank you very much. May I have confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on January the 20th, 2016? Dr. Nuria, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor? Carried unanimously. Going through the agenda, item number 3, we will hold for deputation. Item number 4, we will also hold for a deputation. Item number 5, the body-worn camera project, motion to receive. Councillor Lee, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 6, the quarterly report, occupational health and safety update. That's for the fourth quarter of 2015. A motion to receive. Councillor Lee, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 7, we'll hold for a deputation. Item number 8 is the annual report, and it's obviously more than an annual report because of the change in doing the numbers for the 2013, 14, 15 domestic violence statistics. May I have a motion to receive? Dr. Nuria, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 9, the annual report 2014, the Toronto Transit Commission Special Constables. Motion to receive. Councillor Lee, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
Chair, I'd just like to comment on the very comprehensive report that they've submitted to us.
Yes, I thought so too. Without a fancy cover as well. Item number 10, the annual report 2015 name badges. Motion to receive. Mr. Jeffers, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 11 is the annual report 2015 summary of grievances. Motion to receive. Councillor Lee, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Carried unanimously. Item number 12 is the 2015 uniform promotions annual report. Motion to receive. Ms. Mulliner, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Item number 13 is the annual report 2015 secondments. Motion to receive. Ms. Mulliner, Councillor Lee seconds. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 14 is a hold for deputation. Item number 15 is the establishment of Mental Health External Advisory Committee. Motion to approve.
I so move.
Dr. Nuria, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Item number 16 is a hold for deputation, as is item number 17. Item number 18 is a response to the Toronto Police Service Board's audit requests. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 19 is amended awards policy, the establishment of the Robert Qualtrough Award and the Mental Health Award. Motion to approve. Dr. Nuria, seconded Ms. Molnar. All in favor? Any contrary? Yes, you may.
My comment would be that in this agenda package, we have two things pertaining to mental health. One is the committee that you formed and this award. I think that emphasizes the board's mandate and the decision to give a high profile to mental health.
I agree. Thank you. Item number 20 is special constable appointments, Toronto Community Housing Corporation. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded Ms. Molnar. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 21 is the contract award to, so I'm going to hold that myself if I may. Item number 22 is the contract award to Weld Experts for the fabrication of 10 prisoner. I'm going to hold that as well. I suspect Councillor Carroll might want to as well when she arrives. Item number 23, special fund request for funding Toronto Police Services LGBTQ bullying prevention video. A motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded Ms. Molnar. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 24, another special fund request for funding of Women at the Centre Toronto Domestic Violence Court Watch Project, with a number of solid supporting letters. Motion to approve. Ms. Molnar, seconded Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 25, the annual report, 2015 Parking Enforcement Unit Parking Ticket Issuance. Motion to approve. Dr. Nuria, seconded by Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 26 is annual report, the 2015 Statistical Report, Municipal Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. Motion to approve. Mr. Jeffers, and seconded Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 27 is the annual report, the 2016 org chart. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded Ms. Molnar. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Item number 28 on your walk-on is the ratification of board decision for the single source purchase for the service of KPMG for advisor to the task force. Motion to approve that. Councillor Lee, and seconded by Dr. Nuria. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item 29 is a motion to change. We will hold that because it is requires us to show it up on the screen. I think that covers everything off. So we'll go back to the deputations. There is one, item number 3 is a deputation, in fact, 2 deputations, I guess, on the use of the C8 carbine assault rifles. And the first speaker is the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, and Margaret Bear. Thanks. You know the rules? 5 minutes?
Thanks. Thank you very much for including us on the agenda to speak to this on behalf of the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. Media has reported that the police service has purchased or is in the process of purchasing the carbine semi-automatic guns to be placed in the police cruisers. We wish to know how many such guns are being considered to be purchased, how much money is allocated for the purchase, and the account from which the funds will be secured. We also wish to see any reports that justify these purchases and when it was approved by the board or by senior management. We're very concerned about making such military-style equipment available to officers other than those who operate in the emergency task force. Officers have not always used their pistols with proper care, and the effect is negative on the officers themselves, and of course, occasionally on the public. The board has a very, the public held, sorry, I apologize. The board held a very public debate on the general availability of energy-conducted weapons, the tasers, in 2013. And the board decided, in part based on those consultations, that tasers would be restricted to supervisors. That kind of public debate is needed about the carbines, a much more lethal weapon than the taser. We ask the board to schedule times for the public to present on this very important issue. We request the board to restrict the availability of carbines to the emergency task force until the public debate occurs and until the board decides on a course of action. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions the board members might have? Thank you. Next is Chris Langenfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. First, I'd like to say I agree with TPAC that this is something that there should be some public consultation on, and just recognizing that the fact that it's being brought up here, and this may be what ends up being deemed as having been the public consultation, I just thought I'd speak quickly on it. I don't mind the concept personally of the chief mentioned to the press last month that the idea here was that these rifles were to replace the shotguns that officers are currently carrying, and to me that seems to make sense, that in limited situations where a rifle would be preferable to a shotgun, and I think that's a logical thing for service members to have access to in certain situations. My concern is, though, that we don't want to see situations where we have officers patrolling the streets with assault rifles. One of the issues here, I think, is when you look at the effective range of these weapons, and I'm sure the service could provide you with some accurate weapons. What I was able to find reference to for the Glock pistols that the officers carry, the accuracy is roughly 50 to 100 meters, and there's a maximum range of somewhere in the neighborhood of a half a kilometer. Compare that to the C8 rifles, and you're looking something more like an accuracy of 400 to 600 meters with an effective range of up to 2.5 to 3 kilometers that a bullet will travel. And so I think we have a concern where in situations where an officer does need to discharge their weapon, where we can have bullets flying 2-3 kilometers through the city, they're likely to hit something that isn't intended. And so I think that this certainly has to be a last choice weapon. It has to be something that the board has to dictate when are the appropriate times for it to be used. There have to be clearly defined rules and policy as to its deployment on the streets. We've seen in areas like in Paris when the terrorist attacks were happening that the concept of police was, well, we should have a bunch of officers with assault rifles standing on street corners, and that was going to make the public feel more confident and comfortable. And I personally don't agree with that. I think there's limited times where they are useful, but I think seeing them on officers in a regular everyday basis isn't a good thing and doesn't make me personally feel much more reassured. The other issue with these weapons is the clip size to them, the number of bullets that can be carried. I believe from reviewing it, the standard clip size for a C8 is 30 rounds. And I think the idea of having officers deployed on the streets with 30 rounds of high-powered rifle bullets just doesn't seem appropriate. When I think of using a rifle, that's a precision weapon. The fact that a missed shot goes on and on for a long distance means that you're taking one or maybe two shots to bring down a target, and that's it. So the idea of having 30 rounds means that each officer can face 15 targets, hypothetically. And that's not the situation we're faced with. That may be a military situation where you have military officers facing that number of opponents, but when we're talking about police officers, if they're outnumbered that much, then I think that the police are probably in the wrong. If they're outnumbered 15 to 1 on an officer, then there's probably an issue with the police and not what's going on with the public in that case, because we do have 2,000 to 3,000 officers available to call on at any given time. So I think that part of the board's policy should limit the clip size on these weapons, that should be one of the things that you consider. So I thank you for your time and any questions you might have.
This, as board members know, was not an item on the list, but it came up because the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition wanted to flag it. So, Mark, is there anything as chief that you want to respond to, or board members, do you have any questions?
I guess I could respond at certain points. I mean, from a technical perspective, Staff Sergeant Dave Gillis is here, so if there are things for clarification from a technical perspective, I'd be more than happy to call him up to talk on it. There are a couple of things, and I just want to make sure that the misinformation doesn't get turned into fact. First and foremost, it doesn't matter whether or not there was 1 round in the clip or 100 rounds in a clip. The big thing is the judgment training that is required. And why do you use that round? When do you use it? And for what purpose is the first and foremost, most important aspect of it. So we're very strict with our judgment training. The second piece is not every officer is allowed to have access to that firearm. It is comprehensive training, which is 40 hours mandatory, that is given to each and every officer before they have the ability of carrying that weapon out. Third, there's yearly qualifications to ensure that they understand the seriousness and that they still have the judgment capabilities of having an opportunity to carry the weapon. Fourth, it does not have the penetration power of a shotgun. Tests have proven that over and over again in the gel pack test scenarios. So it is less impact than the shotgun that is out there. 5, it is a much more accurate weapon, which allows for better accountability for our officers when they have to use lethal force in any circumstance. 6, whenever an officer uses this type of weapon, one of the issues is how comfortable or the size of the actual weapon. This C8 has the capability of being more adaptable to size of officer. And so when you factor all of those things into place, the fact that we've replaced it with a shotgun, which is a much more safer, much more accurate, and has a high level of accountability for our officers to utilize the gun, it was not done in isolation. Is there a necessary for long rifle force in the streets? Yes, there is, which is why we've had the shotguns. I've taken the shotguns out to reduce any type of gun confusion because I've introduced less lethal, which is in the shotgun form, and I do not want any type of confusion when an officer has a mindset to use less lethal, and I'm in the process of trying to have 500 more people with less lethal options out on the road. So that is a purpose for why we did that. So the military component is not, I mean, it sounds sexy in a newspaper. It is not a military weapon. It is a weapon that is used for the type of force and the environment that it is needed for.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffers?
Yes, in view of the fact that there are increased sensitivities and fears of gun violence and what have you, what can we do to reassure the public that you know, from some of the things that you're saying that you know, I think there's information that needs to be disseminated among the public. How would you suggest we do that as a chief?
Well, maybe a stronger messaging piece from my component to express exactly the qualities of that piece of equipment that I've issued. The other aspect of it is when you look at the firearm prevalence that we have in the city right now, we've got an issue. We've seized over 1,100 firearms last year. 11 of them were submachine guns. I've got an issue with that, and I want to make sure from a safety perspective, the officers have the ability of performing effectively. You cannot use a handgun whenever there is a long gun that is against a handgun. It will not be successful, and that has been tested time and time again. So utilizing the stats of the firearms that we're seizing, the types of firearms that we're seizing, the level of training that we have involved in utilizing the firearms, and the capability of the round itself, I think are aspects that we could promote a little bit more so that the general public have a better understanding of why we're using that C8 weapon.
My question was really directed at communicating that kind of information to the public and reassuring the public that there isn't the militarization of the police as some see it as.
Do you want to put a motion forward, Mr. Jefferson? Sorry, Dr. Nuria?
One of the comments I would have is, because you have raised almost 7 points in favor of this compared to the shotgun, would it be sensible to have a 2-minute presentation at the next meeting? I'm just talking about PowerPoint rather than getting the weapons here, and telling the people and the media what it is, compare it, what's the cost, and they ask sensible questions, where is the funding coming from? Answer some of those questions so we are transparent with the community.
Yes, that's...
I'm not saying a half an hour, just 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's something we've done, and just so that you're aware, we did a media day last week, and the response was quite well taken, and with it there was a presentation on the C8 and all of those questions that you had asked, and comparing it with the shotgun. But if it's an opportunity to bring it here again and have Staff Gillis do that, I can do that.
Okay. So I...
Okay, let's, Ms. Milner, and then we'll come back to...
So I think there's a bit of confusion, and I'm sharing in that confusion. I actually watched the video of the media blitz of, I think, I assume it was at the police college. You were holding a weapon, and it was a sock gun. Are we talking about the same weapon? No.
That's the
Okay.
shotgun.
So this is a lethal weapon. The one that's referred to in the TPAC as a carbine semi-automatic gun, that is a lethal weapon. Okay, so I do think that the purpose that we would be well served by having better information, because everyone is very concerned about militarization of police forces. So however it happens, probably is a bit more than a 2-minute presentation, but I think it merits having some of the answers that have been brought forward to the question, some of the answers to some of the questions that have been brought forward, in particular in Mr. Sewell's letter as presented by Dr. Baer.
Councillor Lee?
Just to carry on from that, thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier it was said that they didn't want to see police carrying rifles on the street corners. That is not intention here, right? You won't be seeing police at street corners carrying rifle.
No, there's very robust training to identify the moments in which a long barrel weaponry would be presented in a public environment.
Okay. And the other question that was asked earlier was how many of this? So are you? And you stated that you're replacing the shotgun with the rifles. Is there a 1-to-1 ratio you're talking about? Or?
Yes, at this point, that was what I was looking at. I can, when we do the presentation, just so I don't put myself in the wrong position, I'll make sure we have the number of C8s that we have out.
Thank you.
I think, Chief, it's a good suggestion to be updated on that. I look at it from another point of view, in that we had a great presentation by Deputy Federico in September about people in crisis. The shotgun was part of that as the less lethal. I think I wouldn't mind just an update of where that sits too, and exactly how many units will be carrying it, and what the plan is for longer term. So if we can cover both of those things, And I'd propose a motion that the chief report at the next board meeting on an update of the weapons used, both the shotgun and the C8, for board members. So that's your motion.
So I would like, unless Deirdre has got it, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair, that the chief make a presentation highlighting the benefits of carbine semi-automatic guns versus shotguns, and give us details as to how many units are there in practice, what is the cost, and what is the training.
Yeah, let's also do update on the shotguns too.
Yeah, guns versus shotgun.
So we've just gone beyond the 2-minute presentation then.
Yes.
So you
Okay.
got to let me know exactly what you want so that we can be appropriate with accommodating.
I hope you have understood that I didn't say 2 minutes when I made the motion. All I mean is I want it to be short. Okay, with relevant facts.
Okay. 10 minutes. Sorry, seconder, Ms. Mulliner. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you, and thank you to Chris and Ms. Beer. Thank you very much. The next one, actually, it's the same duo up again. This is, so do we need we don't need anything more of this? We just received the depositions, okay. So the next is item number 4, the Mobile Crisis Intervention Team, and again, there are 2 deputations. Margaret Beer for the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition first.
Thank you again. Yes, we'd like to respond to the evaluation of this, the mobile crisis intervention team. The report by the Deputy Chief Federico, we believe, focused too exclusively on the Iacobucci report and did not take adequate account of the recommendations from the St. Michael's Hospital study. And we think that some of the recommendations from the St. Mike's report really need to be considered. The report makes clear that on numerous occasions, the primary response unit is not as effective as the mobile intervention team. And the problem seems to be, or at least one of the problems tends to be the integration between the PRU and the MSET. And that this requires significant work, and that's emphasized in great detail in the St. Mike's report. Another point that the St. Mike's report makes is the use of handcuffs. Their use should be severely restricted. And as far as we see, this issue has not been addressed in the police report. MSIT officers should also not be in uniform. They should operate in plain clothes, again, based on the recommendations of the St. Mike's review. And we think that this issue has not been addressed by the police. CCAT hours of operation needs to be increased, and we all know that that's been raised on a number of occasions. The issue of extending MCAT throughout the city with more hours has been raised on several occasions in the past. We would like the board to adopt a plan to implement more MCET units available for more hours every day of the week, and to have that in place within the next 2 years, if possible. So we ask the board to address these issues and any other ones that are found within the St. Mike's report, rather than simply proceeding on the basis of agreements to recommendations made in the very good, but nevertheless not totally inclusive Iacobucci report. And to report back, if you could. I thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Board members, any questions? The deputy, you have the presentation attached to your minutes. If not, Mr. Langenfeld?
Thank you again. I have, basically, it's one of the same issues that Ms. Baer raised, which is the issue, and I'll refer you to the executive summary, third paragraph, where it says, MCIT is not the first response sent to a person in crisis. Rather, MCIT acts as secondary responders following an assessment by Toronto Police Service Primary Response Units, PRU officers, and their conclusion that there is no risk of violence. And I think that's backwards. I think we've got a situation where the MCIT are really the most professionally trained people. These are the what we'll call the police service experts in dealing with people in crisis, and they're being required to defer to the first responders, being the average officers that get the call. I can certainly see where if the PRU units are the first to arrive at the scene, they certainly have to contain the situation and try and keep the public safe. But in the sense of dealing with the individual in crisis, I think if the opportunity presents itself, it makes a lot more sense to allow the MCIT teams to be the ones in charge of making the decisions. I think we can all recognize that there are people that deal in the mental health industry profession on a regular basis, and they deal with these types of situations. They deal with people in crisis, and they do so unarmed. They do so without causing harm to the people in crisis, and they do so recognizing that there is some risk, but nonetheless, they're prepared to go into that. And personally, if I were in that situation, I think I would be willing to take more risks for my own safety than a police officer might think would necessarily want to allow. But I think we have to accept that that's occasionally the proper way to deal with these things, that if we have a properly trained team of a police officer and a nurse that has particularly special education in dealing with people in crisis, that those should be the people that are dealing with the person that's having a problem, that they know how to communicate with the person. They're trained and they go into the situation expecting that they may have to take 10 minutes to talk to the person and that the person may not drop the knife or the scissors or whatever the case may be immediately on command, but so be it. So it takes 10 minutes. We all accept that as a regular situation in life, sometimes people don't respond to your orders immediately. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily the standard training of members of the service. We've seen where officers have testified that they believe their understanding of their training is that displaying a weapon is part of a de-escalation process. And I think the rest of us kind of shake our heads at that and think that's ridiculous. But I think maybe that's something that the service needs to do repeated training with the officers or do some testing to see that they properly understand what their training in fact is in terms of de-escalation and make sure that they all recognize and know those things. And I think in these situations, notwithstanding that first responders may be public response units, and so if they're the first ones there, they have to deal with it. But I think once an MCIT team arrives, it would make more sense for those to be the people that are making the decisions and directing who's going to deal with things, that they should be the ones that are able to say to the officers that are there, back off, I'll deal with this. I feel comfortable taking the risk, and so you should put your weapons away and let me deal with it. And those can be the people that decide when it's time to say, well, we have no other choice but for armed officers to deal with this with force. So I hope you'll consider providing a little more detailed policy on how to deal with these things in crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langfeld. Any questions, colleagues? Okay, thank you very much.
One question. Yeah. So are you suggesting that the training needs to be reviewed, or the training is not effective enough, or what are you suggesting?
Well, I think there's two issues. I think the training of officers needs to be I think reviews have been done of what the current training is, and I expect that it's probably good in the most case, but I think there probably needs to be some regular checking in on whether or not officers still understand what their training was. So whether it's every year or every 6 months, that there is some kind of review with officers, whether that's a question of sending them to secondary training, or whether that's simply a question of reviewing with officers what their understanding is of how to properly deal with de-escalation. I think that's one issue. I think the second issue of dealing with the mobile crisis intervention teams is that there should be a change in the policy there where those teams are the lead when it comes to dealing with the situation. And so I think in that case, there is an actual change in the policy needed.
Any other questions? Chief Saunders, it's your report. Is anything you wish to elaborate on or respond to?
I could have Deputy Federico articulate MCIT and the roles and responsibilities and the things that we have done over the past couple of years on the expansion piece. And I could also talk on the training and the fact that I've added a third day of training dedicated strictly to dealing with people in crisis as well as community engagement. That's done annually, and on top of that, there's always comprehensive ongoing training every 5 weeks for officers so that they're up to speed in case they do miss out on certain points. If officers do not pass on the in-service training, they're not allowed to go back out on the road. So de-escalation is at the forefront and is something that is mandatory for each and every officer. So if the board has questions with respect to those elements of what we do, why we do what we do, I can have Deputy Federico stand up and clarify those points.
Any questions? Ms. Mueller?
I don't have questions in relation to what you just suggested. I do find interesting that we have a hospital recommendation that outlined in the TPAC letter where there's 2 items that I'm curious about whether they were considered, the use of handcuffs and the use of uniforms versus non-uniform. So because those are on the continuum of this issue, I see Deputy Federico getting up. I'd be interested in knowing, I'm assuming that this was addressed, and the fact that it isn't in the CRICH report recommendations is interesting. So over to you.
Thank you very much. With respect to handcuffs, the board will know that we changed the procedure, which now advises officers that, keeping in mind officer and public safety, officers may use discretion when determining whether to use handcuffs. That's now in our procedures. That's a direct result of information from such evaluators as CRICH, Iacobucci, and JKE. It's actually the results of our own reviews of our police practices, so that's been addressed specifically. With respect to the wearing of apparel, again, if the board will turn the page to the appendix, recommendation number 6, you'll see a fulsome explanation of why police officers are in uniform and the nurses are in attire that the hospitals believe is appropriate. So I invite the board to read the response to recommendation number 6. This is a very carefully considered decision, and one that, in the interest of standardizing across all sectors and in providing the best possible service and agreement, was made. This is the clothing and equipment we would issue our mobile crisis teams.
Thank you, Deputy. Any other questions, colleagues? If not, may I have a motion to receive the report? Councillor Lee, seconded. Dr. Nuria, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. And receive the deputations as well. We'll just put that in. That goes right there. Perfect. That gives us number 7, and again, a deputation, and again, Ms. Langerfeld. You were under by about 3/4 of a minute in the first two. We're not adding it, just so you know.
Fair enough. I will be very quick here. Two quick points. On the second page, your list of approved and dispersed items. In the third section, you have governance retreat, $27,000. I don't believe, or I couldn't find anywhere where that was presented to the board prior to this being dispersed, and I think the board's policies on fund disbursements require that it be brought up before the board ahead of time, so I couldn't find it in October to December, certainly when I looked. The other items are the TPAA, in the top section, $17,000 for essentially a trip to San Diego for soccer games for members of the police service, and I don't think that meets the Police Services Act statutory declaration that the use of the funds has to be in the public interest, and I'm not sure that paying those fees for police officers meets that requirement of being in the public interest, so I question that.
Yeah, I'm going to turn, certainly for the first one, to the Executive Director, Joanne Campbell, who I think has answers, and also for the second one.
The expenditure for the retreat was, in fact, approved by the board well in advance of that expenditure.
Okay, so I must have missed it. I only looked in October to December.
And in terms of the other expenditures, they're governed by board policy, which is actually appended to another item on this agenda, which you might have seen. So those are items that the board has decided meet the criteria, which is to expend the special fund in a way that is in the public interest. The funding of members' participation in sporting events is a long-standing expenditure of the board. It's part of the board's commitment to health and wellness of its members and has been a feature of our policy as long as I can remember.
And I would simply suggest that that might be appropriate for the police union and certainly for officers and perhaps even as an expense from the service to deal with their members and the health of their members, but I question whether or not that falls into a general in the public interest consideration that the board's required to use for this fund. So perhaps we just agree to disagree on that, but I thought I would raise it since it was on the list here.
You've made your point. Thank you.
And I would just, well, I guess I'll go back and check what the governance retreat precisely was for 30,000 or 27,000. Thank you.
So just, Chris, just so you know, that governance retreat was the first discussion as an offsite to discuss the KPMG report. The board had never had a full discussion of it. It took place in early October. Okay? And it was approved well in advance. So that, item number 7, I need a motion to, unless board members have any further questions or comments, a motion to receive. Councillor Lee, seconded Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Carried. And receive the deputation as well. Just assume I've added that in. That takes us to number 14, is it correct? Which is hold for deputation again. Let me guess. Yes.
Well, the good news is it's my last one today, so.
Yeah, well, that's good. No, thank you for doing it.
I'll refer the board to page 26 of the appendix, which is the table 3, the major crime indicators as of December 31st. And it compares the number of, I'm assuming it's reported offenses from 2005 compared to 2014, and indicates that there's a reduction in 27% for the number of major crimes reported. Meanwhile, I went through and compared the numbers both in previous budget requests and looking at the TPS's published statistical annual reports. And it looks like from 2005 to 2015, there's a 1.1% increase in the number of of uniformed officers, and a more significant increase in the number of civilian officers. Unfortunately, the way the information is presented, both in what's presented to the board in the operating budget requests that are made and what's available on the TPS statistical reports, doesn't always give the comparable information to be able to look at one year versus another. I would suggest that in future, for all the operating budget submissions to the board, that the board requests that the service provide comparable figures for previous years. You can look through, of course, there's masses of paperwork and information here, but when you look through, some of the items only have current year figures. Some of them only show a change from previous year and don't even tell what the actual totals are. So it prevents you, certainly I'm not able, looking at these numbers, to actually make proper comparisons of a lot of these figures and to know what's actually happening. And so I question if you're able to, when you look at those those pieces of information. In addition, the TPS used to publish annual reports, but those ended as of 2012, and it appears that they no longer publish annual statistical reports. So there is no information available. So I would suggest that perhaps the board should be requesting that information, something equivalent to what used to be provided in those TPS statistical reports, which are available on their website, that information be provided to the board on an annual basis and made public, so that there is some ability to do some comparisons and actually figure out what's happening with crime statistics, with numbers of officers, with civilian levels. I think when you look through, it's questionable with all these masses of information related to the budget, whether with the civilianization that's happening, in fact, there isn't an increase in the number of officers taking place at the same time, that officers are being brought in some cases based on estimates of how many they think are going to depart next year. That number of officers don't in fact leave the force, and so it ends up that there's an increasing number of officers on the payroll, and at the same time we've got levels of crime decreasing. It's questionable if one leads to the other. Is it simply that having more officers available is reducing the level of crime, which may be arguable, but as we all know, the approved budget, the net budget, is over $1 billion, and that's sort of a mental number that we all question, and so it's hard to say that it's justified, the amount of funding that's being spent on the number of officers that we have, if there isn't some logic in reducing the number of officers simply to be able to deal with the levels of crime if we don't actually have too many uniformed officers on the service right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, board members? Chief Saunders, is there anything you want to address in terms of number of officers?
I can say since 2012, we're 365 less uniform officers.
Thank you. With that, the board members, if there are no other questions, that was the only deposition on that. If not, may I have a motion to approve the report? Dr. Noria, seconded Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. That brings us to, now the Councillor Carroll wanted to do, item number 16 is next, is it correct?
You can proceed with the deputation.
Okay. So I will do exactly that. I will proceed. There's a deputation on item number 16, and we'll proceed with that. But I will hold it for discussion. So it is Carl Gardner. No one is illegal. Carl? And Carl, you've got 5 minutes, and I'll give you a minute's warning if that's okay.
Before I begin, I've got a quick question, because I don't know like procedures here or anything.
You have 5 minutes.
But it says that you are recommending that Chief Saunders will give an update, I guess, on these city council motions. Is that what's in the minutes right now?
Yeah, so we are going to request him to come back to us. Normally, he'd have several months to do so. So
Okay.
that is on, it's come from the city. We then formally ask him to come back to us. So, but we do take depositions at this time based on that. So that's your opportunity to get your message across to us. And have you got something in writing for us, or have you?
I got something writing for me.
Okay, good. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
We do have something, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm here today because a man named Jared came to us, as countless others before him have, with his story of betrayal by the Toronto police. Jared is a mid-20s Toronto resident who was a witness to his cousin being shot in his building's parking lot. Jared called an ambulance and went voluntarily to issue a statement to the police. While there, the police asked him for his name and date of birth, and as he was giving his statement, they were calling immigration enforcement and checking his immigration status. When they found out that he was actually in between statuses, they arrested him. He was thrown in the Toronto Immigration Holding Center for almost 3 months without charge. So we were able to get him counsel, and he fought his detention, but he was eventually released on the grounds that his detention was illegal in the first place. Jared is one of the many people reported to the CBSA by the Toronto Police with no cause and no recourse. In the fall, I was the co-author of a report that contained Jared's story and many others about police doing immigration enforcement work in a sanctuary city. Through FOI requests that we filed with the CBSA, we found that last year the Toronto Police were reporting 100 people a week to the CBSA. That's 14 people a day. What's worse is that 83% of these people reported were done on the basis of a status check. Now, status checks are CBSA classifies status checks as based on an officer's suspicion that an individual might not have status. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't tell by looking at you or talking to you what your immigration status is. And so this level of officer discretion to arbitrarily perform these status checks is fertile ground for racial profiling. I mean, really, who do you think is being status checked when they're pulled over at a planned vehicle safety blitz or when they're cooperating with a police investigation? Not only that, but what is a status checked if not a form of asking for status by any other name? Sure, Jared wasn't asked for his immigration status directly, but the police are just turning around and asking the CBSA instead once they have his name. So when Chief Saunders and yourself, Mr. Pringle, are in the media assuring residents of Toronto that police are not asking, that you have a don't ask protocol, this is deliberately misleading us. This is an underhanded and disingenuous way to get around your own policies in the Police Services Act, as well as it's a blatant violation of Toronto's sanctuary city policy. Residents of the city who are undocumented, many times because they're waiting for their papers to be renewed, submitted, or reviewed, live in fear of the Toronto police. They're afraid to walk down the street. They're afraid to take the TTC. Worst of all, they're afraid to call the police in times of need because they're afraid they're going to be status checked based on the color of their skin or their accent. The Don't Ask policy in the Police Services Act claims to only protect victims and witnesses of crime from being asked their immigration status. Now, obviously, Jared and others are exceptions to this rule, but all other interactions with the police are not covered under this policy. There's also nothing in the Police Services Act that compels officers to communicate individual status to the CBSA. But the discretion in this matter is not used. Instead, anyone who an officer suspects might not have a full immigration status is run through the CBSA, and like I said, 100 times a week last year. Take, for example, that only 7% of individuals reported to the CBSA by the police last year actually had outstanding warrants in their names. This means that the police are targeting neighborhoods and patrolling the streets in order to do immigration enforcement work. This is why City Council has decided to remove the police services from the list of accessible services to all Torontonians in their outreach material called Access TO. And this is why City Council has requested that the Toronto Police both expand their Don't Ask policy to include all encounters with the police, and this means don't ask the individual and don't ask the CBSA, and to create a don't tell component, ensuring the police do not arbitrarily share an individual status with the CBSA unless it's directly related to a criminal offense. This is not an impossible task. Dozens of cities across North America have actually implemented these policies already, and I urge you to take these motions seriously. This simply can't wait. It's time for Torontonians to feel safe in their own city. It's time for the police to stop doing the work of immigration enforcement, and it's time for Toronto to finally and truly become a sanctuary city. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, board members? Okay, we'll defer the discussion, if we can, until Councillor Carroll is here, if she wanted to be part of this discussion. That's all right? Okay. Thank you very much. Item number 17 is, and again, a hold for deputation. And the deputant is Harmy Mendoza, Executive Director, Women Abuse Council of Toronto. Thank you.
You're welcome.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Harmy Mendoza, and I work for the Women Abuse Council of Toronto. I am the current Executive Director. Women Act is the City of Toronto Coordinating Committee with a membership of 28 diverse organizations serving women and children experiencing violence. This deputation is in support of City Council's recommendation that the Toronto Police Service Board review, in consultation with the Violence Against Women sector, policies related to responding to intimate partner violence, including, but not limited to, the mandatory charging policy, enforcement of no-contact orders, and probation conditions. The role of the police is critical in domestic violence cases, and we would like to applaud the commitment the Toronto Police has shown to address this important issue. However, we remain concerned about several policies currently in place and their unintended consequences. For example, with the pro-charging or mandatory charging policy, we believe there have been negative unintended consequences, specifically as to how the pro-charging policy is being implemented. This policy was intended to support women by taking the onus off women to report and to increase the laying of charges. But service providers in Toronto and across Ontario have raised concerns to women who have been victims of abuse, are being charged either along with their partner, dual charges, or on their own, sole charges. Local research, as well as the final report of the ad hoc federal, provincial, territorial working group reviewing spousal abuse policies and legislation, also raised this as an issue with how the policy was being implemented. The use of a gender-neutral approach and lack of sufficient training could be contributed to this problem. Local community research on the mandatory charging policies points to dual or sole charging being at least in part due to the use of a gender-neutral approach. This approach doesn't consider that a woman's use of force is often a response to a sustained pattern of abuse by male partners. When interviewed for a local study, this is how one woman who was being abused by their partner explained why she had been charged. And I quote, "I couldn't think of any other way to get him off of me. I couldn't push him off of me because he had my arms pinned behind me. So the only way I could think of was to bite him, and the pain would probably get him off of me. Obviously, that didn't work, because he was still sitting on me." The report of the ad hoc federal, provincial, territorial working group reviewing spousal abuse policies and legislation also points to the police not being able to use discretion in such cases, or using too much discretion in applying the policy, and a lack of sufficient police training on the nature and effects of interpersonal violence. Dual charging is still taking place in Toronto, and sole charging is also on the rise, particularly in instances involving immigrant and refugee women with language barriers and other marginalized groups. Despite the adoption of the dominant aggressor model of investigation across police services, including Toronto, local community providers report dual charging and sole charging of women who are victims of abuse is still occurring at increased frequency. The domestic violence statistics reports shared with the Toronto Police Services Board today, agenda item 8, confirms that charging of women in domestic violence cases have increased since 2013. A local agency that operates PAR program found that of the 107 women who had been charged, there were 15 women who had initiated calling the police for help. This was not a systematic review of cases, but that is what we need to determine the extent of this practice and what are the circumstances leading to women being charged.
You have
Given
one
this,
minute
one
left.
minute, yes, thank you. Given the serious impact of dual and sole charging, we would request that the Toronto Police Service assess the implementation of the dominant aggressor model of investigation to determine what's leading to these outcomes. In order to assess the size and extent of the problem, good data are needed. The Domestic Violence Advisory Committee has raised the issue of mandatory charging and has requested data to identify the size and extent of this problem in order to support the finding of solutions. We would like to request the Toronto Police Service that they make clear data publicly available on the outcome of domestic violence cases. Evaluation research is also needed to examine the impact of mandatory charging policies on women, children, and families, as well as any evidence on recidivism or the deterrent effect of this policy in Toronto. We also need to examine how this policy is actually understood and applied in Toronto by police.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You obviously have a written copy there. Would you be prepared to submit it to us?
Absolutely, I have a copy for you here.
Great, thank you
Yes,
very much.
thank you.
Colleagues, questions of Ms. Muller?
Thank you for your presentation. So at the very end of your presentation, you asked for one thing. I want to make sure that that's the key request that you are asking us to consider, which is a data review of the call logs and the way.
Yes, that would definitely be very helpful if we can have access to that data. And I was about to go on the importance of integration evaluative components as well, or I could also go on saying that the community out there is full of experts in service provision for women and children. I am part of a network of 38 coordinating committees working in the province of Ontario who are investigating these striking new numbers. We're seeing more and more women solely charged. And so there are experts who are out there already doing some initial work about this. We want to be able to access data, and we want to be able to work in collaboration with the Toronto Police to be able to implement or to be able to start looking at how is this policy implemented and why are we seeing all of these numbers. We want to know why.
So I'm hearing that not only do you know what data you would like to look at, but you also are working with experts who could identify the methodology that the data could be used for.
Absolutely. And
Thank you.
Toronto is a beautiful city that has a very specific ethnographic component. And so Toronto is different than Ottawa, than Montreal, than London. And so we want to identify those trends in different geographic areas. We have specific experts who are working in local areas. So the community is out there, and we're just crying out for a little bit of collaborative work with the Toronto Police.
Any other questions, colleagues? Comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. May I have a motion then to approve the report and the recommendation? Yep. Dr. Nuria, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor? Carried unanimously. Takes us, I think, to 21 next. And I held that. I just was interested, and it's the bicycle repair, but is it accurate that there was only, in effect, one submission from the Urban Cyclist Co-op? And so, in effect, is there no one else in the hundreds of bicycle? Sandra, they're relying on you. Sorry about that. No, it's, I'm fascinated that in effect, we put it out and only 2 vendors requested a copy of the documents.
That's right.
And then only one of them came back?
One of the vendors bid, yeah.
And like there's hundreds of, how many did we make it available to? I mean, the hundreds of bicycle shops across the city, many of them looking for
Yeah, our specifications were generic specifications.
Yeah.
We posted it to Merck's, which is a worldwide procurement submission, or I guess bidding
Right.
website, and we only received the 2.
But only
Or sorry,
one of
only
them-
received the 1, only
received the
downloaded by
one,
2. That's right.
2 of them. And where are these guys located? Here in Toronto?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. They're on John Street, according to the, okay, someone knows.
Yeah.
Okay, I just find it fascinating that's what we got. That was my only question, colleagues. Thank you for the answer, Sandra.
No problem.
So with that answer, a motion to approve the report of the award of contract, Councillor Lee, seconded Dr. Nuria. All in favor? And my question is somewhat similar on the next one, item number 22. As weld experts in the fabrication of 10 prisoner wagons, do we need that many? I mean, what have we got now that we're using? And I don't know who's going to answer this, but I wouldn't mind just a little bit more elaboration.
Good afternoon.
No one was expecting questions on these, were they?
No, we're ready.
Okay, good.
Yeah. This is just part of the life cycle program. As you see in the report, the mileage on those wagons is quite high. The wagons, the chassis had been purchased already out of budget. The boxes, if you will, that's the containers for the prisoners. That's what we're talking about in here. And you'll see that they do deteriorate over time. So they've got a number of years of usage out of these. They have deteriorated, and we have to keep them obviously safe for the people that go into the wagons, and also secure, so people obviously don't get out of the wagons as they do deteriorate over time. Is there anything you want to add to that, Carol? This is Manager Carol Gallenlock of Court Services and Prisoner Transportation.
So each one of these vehicles over 200,000 kilometers is what you're saying, and 6 to 10 years. There's no use for them beyond that, but is this something we do automatically, or has someone looked at these things and said they shouldn't be on the road anymore? Do we do it on a case-by-case basis, or, I mean, the office tower, the light bulbs are now replaced whether they need it or not, just on a cycle. So is it that, or is it?
We have a comprehensive maintenance program on the wagons. We have our fleet people here as well from the mechanical side of things.
Prepared.
But yeah, they go in for regularized inspections. In fact, as you know, they are parked in the garage area. They're regularly maintained. They have a close maintenance cycle that's well documented, and they keep a very close eye on these. Now, these would have been purchased approximately the same time preceding this request. So yes, to your question, they're needed, and it's from a mechanical point of view. The life expectancy is essentially done with these.
So we don't sell them on to a more needy police force, we just scrap them, is that right?
Yeah, I'll seek assistance if I need to get into that.
Okay, Rick, thanks, you've answered my questions. I just wanted to make sure it was done when they're absolutely at the end of their life, et cetera.
Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Carol?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Board members have no other questions. I'd ask for a motion to approve the purchase contract. Dr. Nuria, seconded Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Carried unanimously. What have we got left here? Just the... Yes, right. So it's just 29 and 16, is that right? Yes. And you now have a motion on the board at the request of the mayor, I think, to change the board date from the 14th to either the 20th or the 21st. Anybody? Okay, we're saying the 21st. Is everybody comfortable if we go to the 21st? Either one? Okay. Chief Saunders, Board Member Jeffers, you're checking your technologies. I realized that would defeat me, so I will just say yes. Mark, you okay?
I'm just trying to look at what I can push out. I've got things on both days. If I had a choice, the 20th would be better than the 21st.
Councillor Lee, Councillor Lee, you're away both days? Yeah, okay, and so we'll be missing 2 board members, but everybody else will be here. So we'll say the 20th, okay? So the motion put forward by Mr. Jeffers, seconded by Ms. Molnar. All in favor? Contrary? Carried. So Councillor Carroll is not here. So that will take us back to the discussion on 16, which is the access to city services for undocumented Torontonians. We had the deputation. Is there any further discussion that people want to do on this? Councillor Lee?
No, I understand that Councillor Carroll wants to be part of this discussion, but she said she'll be back by now. Unfortunately, she's not. But the recommendation is for the chief.
You know, I think
to bring a
if we
report back.
want, we could defer this to
Right.
to the next meeting and give Councillor Carroll an opportunity to.
Right. I think
come
that's what I
forward.
would. Yeah. Let's defer it to the next meeting then.
Ms. Muller, do you have any points you want to make?
I think the only point I'd like to make is what we are doing is moving the city council's motion
Right.
forward for the chief to come back with a report.
We report anyway.
So Councillor
when they come
Carroll
back,
will
we
have the
report.
opportunity to discuss it at that time. So there's no point in deferring.
Okay, then why would,
So I'd like to
Ms.
make that
Muller?
motion.
Let's move the motion then.
Well, I was going to make a similar point and just ask the chief when the report might be available. 3 months, so that would take us to the May meeting.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
okay, so you're going to move
Move
the
the
motion?
motion, that's right.
Seconded by Ms. Muller. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Any other business that people want to bring before the meeting? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn. I
Councillor
shall
Lee,
move.
and seconded Dr. Nuria. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much.